Hi, my name is Kirk, and I'm here to talk about how to stay motivated and innovative in constant adversity. Before I start, I wanted to dedicate this presentation to Tracy, Jason, and Christine, who were friends of mine who suffered from chronic disease and didn't make it. So, a little bit about me is that I've had chronic disease for over a decade, including being bedbound for the last 5 years. Despite all of that, I've created and built a successful remote consulting business just based on word of mouth because I can't take on too much work. And it relates to leadership effectiveness. So I have created a very different way of approaching leadership that empowers leaders and their teams, that is designed to help them in tough, impossible circumstances so that they can get success that's resilient. And that directly relates, I think, to what I've learned from living with chronic disease. And chronic disease is the reason why I wasn't able to make the conference. I'd planned to right up until the night before I was supposed to do the talk. And unfortunately, I'm unable to travel. So I hope that this talk is going to be enough. So you might ask yourself, when I was looking through the conference and all the wonderful talks that I wanted to go to every single one, what is mine doing here? What is this talk doing in the conference? I didn't see how many other patients are on stage, but it seems mostly there's medical professionals and doctors. Well, I think I was invited because chronic disease is a tough pathway for both patients and doctors. We live in a world of change and complexity where dreams we have, ideals and hopes can be dashed. And the journey is very long. And the path is riddled with challenges. And it can get us down. So I don't want you to worry, I am Australian. So this is not a pep talk. This is very practical. I want to be able to give you something that generates insight, rejuvenates the way you think about adversity in our chronic disease community, and also to lift your hearts to continue in the face of the difficulties that we have to endure. So we know that to win against chronic disease, we need to be persistent. And that's because chronic disease is persistent. We need to outlast it, both doctors and patients. And we need the motivation to keep ahead of disease progression. Because if we take our eye off the goal, we can accidentally make things worse very, very quickly. We also need to be able to be innovative because there's limited traditional medical treatments. And so creative thinking and experimentation in this particular area, from my own personal experience, is a very important part of healing. And chronic disease can morph and change in an instant. One of the reasons I can't come today is because I'm fighting a superbug. So we need to pivot and adapt, my doctor and me, to try to help me be as effective and as capable as I possibly can. Living and treating with chronic disease isn't for the faint-hearted. Doctors face the adversity of things like limited treatments available in traditional medical fields, the lack of treatment availability depending on country or zone. When they're trying to experiment or try things, there's suspicion and sometimes ridicule of others. And it's a hard place to sit because they're not always going to be the hero. Sometimes we have to try things literally just to see if that could make it better, but it may not. They may not always have the answers. It's not like, oh, you have a tumor on your foot or a cyst on your foot and we could cut it out and now it's all better. And they can be subject to a lot of criticism. Patients, on the other hand, have a lot of adversity too. So treatments you take that can be effective, for instance, the initial treatments I took in 2013 were effective for a period of time, but it deteriorated in its effectiveness. You have this morphing of disease that can happen as the immune system struggles. You can gain additional infections, which is what happened to me because the immune system has left everything wide open. You can experience the loss of family and friends that may not understand or just can't keep up with the level of difficulty. You can suffer from terrible isolation. And worse still, you can then be gaslighted in the medical community or by friends and family or people you meet about what you're suffering. So over time, this can be exhausting and stressful. And that stress and exhaustion can translate into negative behavior. We all get things don't go our way. Now, that can compound over time. And the pattern, just from my personal experience, I'm not a medical professional, is I've seen that doctors, when they become extremely stressed and exhausted, can retreat. They can disengage from patients. They want to get to save themselves and their energy. They want to create a distance. And that produces a risk, though, of coming across as quite arrogant or failing to see key issues because they're not close enough, they're not to the patient to understand why something might not be working. Or another thing I've seen is other doctors overreact, over-engage, they can't switch off, they give too much of themselves. And so they struggle to be objective at times. And on the patient side, stress and exhaustion in this complex context translates into, sometimes I've seen friends of mine completely lose trust in the medical profession altogether and try to take over their treatment. And they don't have the proper medical knowledge or data and can actually self-harm, sabotage their good intentions. Or I've seen patients who are so tired and so exhausted from the fight that they become overly compliant. So they'll just put themselves in the hands of professionals that may or may not know their circumstances very well. They hand it over too much. They don't do things themselves and they start to spiral down. And sadly, I've had friends that have died from just saying to themselves, I can't take this anymore. I'm just going to do whatever this doctor says, and that's it. So that can become a toxic mix. You can have disengaged or overreactive doctors combined with distrustful or overly submissive patients. And then we get this feeling in our wonderful, vibrant community, can suddenly feel like we are on opposing sides, doctors, patients, medical professionals, patients and their families. But the superpower that we have as a community is working together to push boundaries. The success that I've had with my chronic disease, the reason I'm not dead right now is because of these wonderful doctors who will face what I'm going through together, work with me and experiment and push the boundaries to work out a solution. And in reality, being on opposite sides isn't really who we are. So when you see this behavior in doctors or patients, what you've got to understand is everyone's doing their best. It's a tough context. We're getting exhausted, stressed, and burnt out. And that's just from this relentless path of treating or living with chronic conditions. We're actually side by side in a robust community. We are here at a conference, patients and doctors working together towards new horizons, transforming, innovating, making new solutions every day, little by little. Look at us now. Today we're at the cutting edge, forced by urgency to push boundaries and pave the way. Consider when I came down with chronic illness 10 years ago, the kind of treatments I was given is very different to the kinds of treatments that I'm talking about now with my doctors. And we also look at things a lot differently too. Even, for example, our knowledge about the gut and its role in health and the immune system. And we do achieve great things together. In my humble opinion, we're pioneers. What we do, what we discover has the potential to help so much more than just us. Our experimentation and exploration keeps moving diagnosis and treatments forward into new horizons, and that spreads into other areas as well. So all we have to do, apparently, is to persist, because as you'll hear me say this quite a lot in this presentation, because chronic disease is persistent and we need to outlast it. We need to be motivated to keep ahead of disease progression, and innovative, because chronic disease can morph and change. So that's all we have to do. Persist, be motivated, and innovative. So easy, right? Well, the day-to-day reality is a whole different thing, because chronic disease is persistent. So daily, ordinary life for doctors working with it and for patients is a marathon, not a sprint. It's tough. It's tough to do. To keep staying with it, to keep turning up to work, to keep on breathing. There's been times where I've been so ill that all I can think about is just take another breath. Just take another breath. That's the biggest fight that I've had. To keep going. That's what it's like to be on the front line. That's what it's like trying to make a difference. For weeks, for months, for years, and in my case, a decade. At this conference, we can see our community. We're all doing what we do best right now, sharing, challenging each other, connecting, supporting each other. It's easy in these few days when you're in a conference to feel motivated, creative, and persistent. But when the conference ends, we go back. And in reality, afterwards, a lot of us are isolated. There's a team of one or two. For me, it's just me and my sister. Or a small team. Some people are working in a small team, like my doctor, at best. And we head back to our usual routines, and the sparkle fades. And that's when the real fight against chronic disease starts. As I said before, chronic disease is persistent, and we need to persist to defeat it. So, very nice to say, but what makes persisting difficult? That fascinated me for a long time. I thought, why is it that sometimes I'm finding persistence extremely difficult, and at others, not so much? What scuppers all of that effort? Eating the right food, doing the exercise, taking the medicines, having treatments. What's dipping our motivation? What's sapping away our creativity? What's making us want to give up? I was fascinated to find out, who is the real enemy here? What am I up against? And the answer, quite simply, is disappointment, which was a surprise to me. But I'll show you. This makes sense. Let me explain. Now, we all know that disappointment is a natural part of achievement. You've got all these wonderful stories of try, fail, try, succeed. And we're, athletes, politicians, scientists, dancers, computer nerds, gardeners. We experience disappointment every day. Why is it a problem? Couldn't have my coffee this morning. There's a disappointment. I might have missed my train. My partner has forgotten to stack the dishwasher. Our children didn't go to bed when they should. Those are disappointing things to happen. But usually it's okay. We're built to transform disappointment into adapting and pivoting forward. So how we do that? Well, we learn from it. Okay, couldn't have my coffee this morning. I've learned how dependent I am on caffeine, and so I had a strong tea instead. Missed my train. I've learned that if I just play around with that 5 minutes, I'm going to miss it. So, okay, I'll take the taxi today, but next time I'm not going to play around. I've learned that I have to make sure I leave exactly at the time that I have organized. If my partner has forgotten to stack the dishwasher, I could get very disappointed and say, how dare you? Or I could learn why. And I might find out they were up all night with a sore back. So I'm fine. I'll stack it and maybe we'll take them to the doctor. Perhaps the children wouldn't go to bed, and instead of me getting upset, I thought, okay, I'll have a chat, find out why. When I do, I learn that they were stressed about school the next day, and we had a little talk about it. So this is a natural part of life, these little disappointments. They're all very easy to overcome. We stand back, we investigate, we learn, oh, what's happened here? And then we pivot and adapt. And that's how we keep going and persevere. Not hard to stay motivated, not hard to keep your creative thinking going, not hard to move on to the next thing. So we don't often think of disappointment as a big deal, as a blocker, as something that might get quite serious. But here's the thing. Disappointment can actually become completely overwhelming. It can really affect us negatively to the point where well-intentioned, very dynamic human beings' motivation drops. They struggle to think creatively and they want to give up. And what's happening there, from my observations, are that there seems to be overwhelming disappointment being triggered by two things. One, a big event can happen, or two, there's a persistent difficulty that doesn't subside. So here's some examples of a big event that could give a lot of disappointment. For me, when I lost cognitive function and had to pull out of my master's in software engineering at Oxford, that was a big event. It was very disappointing. My motivation went down, my creative thinking went, and I was feeling extremely depressed. Becoming deaf temporarily when the infection spread to my ears was absolutely frightening. I was very disappointed. Losing my taste and smell was disappointing. I'm laughing because my sister lost her taste and smell at the same time. Didn't bother at all, but I was mourning the loss, dreaming of taste and smell. Other examples for people who might not have my situation is lockdown was difficult and was disappointing. A car breaking down, losing a friend, losing a job. That can hit us pretty hard. I'm wondering, can you recall an event that happened where afterwards you may not have known you were disappointed, but you couldn't kind of think straight? You felt like giving up. You wanted to shut down or overreact in some way. In those cases, that's disappointment. We all have these times. Every single one of us has these times. The other type of triggers of overwhelming disappointment can be persistent difficulty. So an example in my life is chronic illness. When I first got chronic illness, I remember it was the first week or so. That was tragic, but it wasn't terribly disappointing because I was going to fight. And after the first month, it was like, okay, this is getting a bit much. And then the first year, I started to get really disappointed it was still continuing. And a decade later, sometimes it hits me. Wow. Wow. Other examples for other people might be just an annoying job. If you think of it that way, an annoying job for 1 week is kind of okay. But after a month, you're starting to get a little worried. A year, it's getting heavy. But after 5 years, that can be a big, big struggle. Can you recall a time when difficulty just didn't seem to go away? And as time passed, if you recall, you couldn't think straight. Maybe you wanted to give up. Maybe you wanted to shut down. Maybe some behaviors were coming back, eating lots of junk food, avoidance, not cleaning, or, drinking too much. or overreacting in some way, just wanting to leave and disappear. This happens to all of us. This happens to all of us. When these two types of disappointment arise, they hit us pretty hard. And sometimes we try to brush it off, and we think, well, if we just brush it off, then we won't be affected. But what happens is that we have different behaviors. They rise. We struggle to keep motivated. We struggle to innovate and be strategic, and we struggle to persist. So sometimes we only notice that we have this overwhelming disappointment when the symptoms of lack of motivation, lack of creative thinking, and giving up arise. Now, here's the thing. What I've noticed is that if we learn to process overwhelming disappointment effectively, we become stronger, wiser, and more resilient. And I help my clients do this. And that's what I notice as a pattern for the last 7 or 8 years. In fact, this conference is full of people who have overcome crushing disappointment. But we tend to show our best at conferences. So we really only hear the success, unless you know their story, of course. And when you see their story, you realize, hey, they've worked this through. They've learned their own ways to overcome crushing disappointments, turn it into their cutting edge, and turn it into that thing that helps them succeed. So this begs the question, what makes disappointment overwhelm us? What's the thing that turns that event or persistent difficulty into something that starts to get us down and change our behavior, even if we brush it off? Quite simply, it's how much meaning it has to you. Let me explain. If it didn't mean anything to you, you wouldn't be disappointed. So the more meaningful something is that you might lose or not get, the higher the disappointment will be. So you could say that disappointment is an indicator of how much something means to you. So if you brush it aside, you're brushing aside something that means the world to you. And that's a dangerous path of disconnection to your authentic self, to your strength and resilience. Now, thank you, Catherine, so much for letting us know, but how does this affect those on the front line who are fighting against chronic disease, and why should we even worry about it? Well, here's the thing. There is nothing more meaningful than saving lives, ending suffering, getting cured, and getting lives back on track. So as a community, this makes us more prone to crushing disappointment. And that's why we can see doctors and patients and friends often struggle, losing motivation, losing their creativity, and losing their ability to persist. Because disappointment can hit us very, very hard. And rightly so, because what we're doing matters, and what we do really, really does count. There is nothing more meaningful than healing and saving lives. And so when disappointment events happen, or there is persistent difficulty in that context, of course, it can be incredibly overwhelming. That's a sign we're alive and compassionate, because we care, because we want to make things better. And so we should. And it sounds strange but these episodes of disappointment that we get are a sign of the vital importance of what we as a community and you as professionals or patients do. Remember, we're patients, doctors, and specialists working together side by side to make the world a better place. And this is a big reason why we should see disappointment when it comes, because sometimes we don't quite see it, We just know our motivation and creativity and persistence is dropping. But we need to face it. We need to rise. We've got to pick ourselves up. We've got to learn from it. And we've got to persist. Because chronic disease is persistent. So the only way to win against it is to persist even more. And I know what it's like. I've overcome a lot of disappointment. I've practiced the technique I'm going to show you shortly. In the past 10 years, I've battled chronic disease. I'm bedbound 95% of the time. I face death here and there. I've lost friends to chronic disease, lost my career of choice, lost friendships and family, not able to finish my master's, had to go through a horrible divorce, and I live with chronic pain and cognitive issues. But during that time, I have also become a successful remote coach and consultant. As I said earlier, specializing in helping teams and individuals turn tough situations around, especially in tough environments. And the key achievements I've had is that I created that leadership approach. I've built this new consulting business on word of mouth alone. My clients work with me whenever I've got the capacity. They will wait when my health drops so that I can join them later. In fact, sometimes I've had waiting lists of 6 months to a year for some of the executives wanting training. I've built a community of dedicated practitioners. I've helped leaders bring projects, programs, and initiatives that affect hundreds of thousands of people into getting ahead of myself, of people into success, whilst also starting a new life and working hard to live independently. And I haven't lost functionality of my body. And I have a deeply meaningful life. And I am making a difference, even though, as demonstrated by me not being able to travel to this conference, I'm sicker than I've ever been. I'm still bedbound 95% of the time. I'm still fighting for my life every day, and I still battle severe episodes of frightening symptoms. So I know a thing or two about overcoming overwhelming disappointment. And I've noticed with my clients and also on my personal journey that the people that can work through this overwhelming disappointment are more successful, they're tougher, they're more resilient, they're more compassionate, they're more innovative, and highly, highly motivated. So here's the thing to remember, though. From my personal experience, you only get 2 choices when disappointment overwhelms you. You can keep it inside, try and brush it off. But the risk there is that negative behaviors that you don't notice or that you're not in control of will take over, like disengagement or overengagement, like distrust or overcompliance. Or you can learn from that disappointment and move forward. And if you want to succeed with a lot of adversity in front of you, then you've got to learn how to learn from disappointment. So this is what I use, and I really do use and have used to get out of overwhelming disappointment that comes on. And it is also what I teach my clients, and it's what I want to share with you today. So this is an exercise. So if there's some people in the audience who've experienced a crushing disappointment or suddenly are recognizing that their motivation is dipping, that their creativity is dulling down, that they're feeling like they want to give up, you may be experiencing disappointment at this time. Then you can follow this exercise with me, and I will summarize it at the end. So this is the one I use to work past crushing disappointment, to get up, keep going, and win in the end. For fun today, I'm calling it the Disappointment Destroyer. Echo, echo, echo. Step 1, appreciate the disappointment. See, you didn't expect that, did you? Because disappointment is healthy. It's risen up because perhaps a standard hasn't been reached. because you didn't get something, because you lost something. So ask yourself, what did I want or expect that I didn't get? Why did I want it? Why did I expect it? So dig in and appreciate that the disappointment has risen up to say, hey, this is not right. Something meaningful is being affected. Number 2, what does this teach me? Now, when we get that heavy disappointment, the brain starts to slow down, creativity starts to reduce. Yet, when we are in disappointing times, we should ramp up that creativity so that we can pivot and adapt and get ourselves out of it. So this is an important question. What does this teach me? Is a way of activating your intellect to shift your brain into learning mode so you can explore what's happening around you. So you can ask yourself, looking at how I didn't get what I wanted or expected, this teaches me that. So for example, I wanted to come to the conference. What does this teach me that I wasn't able to come to the conference? Well, it teaches me to innovate and make a presentation online instead. It also teaches me that I'm not as well as I thought I was, and perhaps I should be exploring different treatments. Step 3, transform the learnings by framing the experience to the positive. Now, saying this can sound a little brutal, and I don't mean look at the bright side. What I mean is, and I'll explain it, is how is this difficulty is a good thing because, and thinking of it as a trigger. Right? So step 3 is to ask yourself, this difficulty is a good thing because, and I've got some things here that could inspire you. It triggers, or it teaches, or it exposes, or it strengthens, or it shifts, or it challenges, or it stops me or us from. When we do this, we shed ourselves of the fear of disappointment, and we feel a sense of bravery. So in my case, this difficulty of not being able to attend the conference is a good thing because it teaches me to rely on my remote business, and it strengthens my resolution to keep growing the online offerings that I have. Step number 4 is, after you've done steps 1 to 3, stand back and just have a wider perspective on the issue and think about, what insights do I have now I've been through that process? This is an important process. So for me, when I am very ill, sometimes I think I'm the only one in the universe. But if I've done this set of questions on the disappointment that I'm still ill after a decade, when I stand back from myself feeling isolated, I realize that I'm there's a lot of us out there, thousands and thousands of people out there with chronic illness, and I am not alone. And there's thousands of doctors working hard to try to make things better. And the last step is very simply, regarding the issue that you're focusing on at this particular time, is to think, what small action could I do from here? Just a small action. And this is important because otherwise we get into paralysis. So it's just something very, very, very small. So what's a small persistent action I could do from here, or what's a small action I could do from here? I've been so disappointed in some cases that all I could think of was to just smile occasionally and have a cup of tea. They were small actions, but you know, it did make a difference. It showed me that I could break out of that disappointing spiral. So that's the technique. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. But I've been using it for 7 years with leaders who are up against it. They're experiencing sexism, racism, huge amounts of adversity. They're experiencing, neurodivergent challenges, being given roles that they aren't qualified for, or not being given enough budget, being given impossible deadlines, being subject to bullying. And this technique, without fail, always shifts just a little bit out of that overwhelming feeling. And that lifts your motivation just a little, lifts your creative thinking just that little bit more, and helps you persist, because persisting is winning. If you do this often, whenever your motivation and creative thinking takes a hit, then I've noticed the results are people are a little bit stronger, and that's all it takes to take another step. So, in summary, we lose motivation and innovative thinking when we lose or fail to achieve something that means the absolute world to us. And our disappointment at that time can be overwhelming. And if we don't deal with it, it becomes toxic, and we get depression, avoidance, anger, fear, grief, behaviors that maybe we don't even notice. And then that can compound into feeling that it's never going to end, it's hopeless, or we can get arrogant and think everybody's idiots, or we might just think, I want to get away, or we might start overreacting to situations when really we should be still and rest. So getting out of overwhelming disappointment is possible. Very simply, you just need to have a way of learning from it. And once you get that insight, your brain can start kicking in with solutions and innovations and pivot and adapt through that disappointment to the other side. So remember, those that can work through overwhelming disappointment, in my humble opinion, I see as more successful, tougher, more resilient, more compassionate, more innovative, and highly motivated, even if their context is still tough. So here's the steps summarized. Number 1, acknowledge and appreciate that disappointment. That's a sign that something that's meaningful to you has been affected. So what did you want or expect and didn't get? Name it. Number 2, get your brain into activate its intellect. So you're in survival mode, try and bring it out into thrive mode by asking, what does this teach me? Start exploring, what am I learning from this? Step number 3, consider framing this to the positive. And I don't mean see the bright, shiny side. I'm just saying, how could this difficulty be a good thing? It's triggering me too. It's triggering the situation to change, maybe. Step number 4, stand back and think. All right, wider perspective. What's my insight now here? And step number 5, quickly get realistic. Don't get stuck in paralysis. What's the small action I could do from here? What's the small action I can do from here? Just be brave and do something in the face of disappointment that says, hey, back off. So in conclusion, with all the adversity that I've suffered and the adversity I'm experiencing even today, I've learned very quickly that the way to dissipate disappointment is to draw insight and learn from it. That disappointment is healthy. It's about having a standard, and the standard, or having things that mean something to you, and that those things have been affected and you're not happy about that. That's a good thing. But you don't want to get stuck in there too long, because then we get these behaviors that can even put well-meaning doctors and patients up against each other. Can you believe it? And that's when disappointment becomes toxic because of stress and exhaustion. It's a long journey. It means that we struggle to see our choices, and it can prevent us from persisting. And again, one last time, persistence is how you win with persistent chronic disease. So keep motivated and innovative in the face of constant adversity by acknowledging and learning from disappointment. That's how we persist. And don't forget, can we please keep using this wonderful power of unity that we have in this conference, where we've got patients and doctors uniting together to push boundaries, fighting side by side, eventually finding effective treatments together, working to alleviate suffering, finding healing, and succeeding together. This is our superpower. We do our best together. So let's make sure that disappointment, let's take it seriously. Let's make sure that disappointment doesn't fracture our community. Again, persistence is how you win against persistent disease. Watch out for each other. Watch out. Notice when disappointment overtakes you. Give yourself care. You matter in this community. Notice when it's overtaking other people, if they're displaying stress behaviors at the extremes, disconnecting, over-engaging. Offer support or get them help. Suggest they take a break. Because the fight we're in together, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. We have to keep staying with it. We've got to keep turning up to work. We've got to keep on breathing, because that's what it takes to fight on the front line and to make a difference. And it might not feel like it sometimes, but everything you do does make a difference. So harness disappointment into learning. That's what I wanted to say today. Let's outlast this adversity together. And I hope you found this a valuable talk. Thank you very much for your time. And I really hope that I will be able to meet some of you maybe next year or when the conference happens again. Thank you.